Welcome to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. I'm Mike Roberts, and Bill Barley's with me, our resident storyteller, historian, and a man who knows about placer gold. And we're taking a look at a part of British Columbia that I guess wasn't known 100 years ago, and hardly anybody even knows about it today.
Yeah, Mike, it's an area very few people have been in. Really, the wilderness people have been in there, and the people who are concerned with wild rivers. And we're talking about that Tatshenshini River country, way up in the northwestern, the farthest northwestern corner of British Columbia. An area up there that kind of juts into the Alaska Panhandle, not too far from Skagway, not too far from Haines, Alaska, not too far from Atlin on the other side.
Now, this old map, this is a mines map, and it shows all of the various mining districts in British Columbia. And this one was done in 1928, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
And to give you how remote this is, we're heading up to way up on here to where the Alsac River is.
Yeah.
But there's a major tributary to the Alsac River that isn't even named in 1928, and that is the Tatshenshini.
That's the Tatshenshini. And the reason the Tatshenshini is so important, Mike, this discovery was made in 1927, a year before this map was produced, and it was a tributary of the Tatshenshini, kind of running into the Tatshenshini from the west, from way up in the hills in the west. And you're talking about mountainous country here, Mike. You're talking about a sea of mountains. You're talking about glaciers. You're talking about 7,000-foot mountains and higher. It's part of the Coast Range, inaccessible, extremely remote.
Well, what prospector would find himself there?
Well, you see, there was Dalton Post there, and we're looking at the old Dalton Trail. And that Dalton Post was an area that the Indians of the area gathered in. These are the Talton Indians, specifically the Klukshu tribe in that area. And they knew this land like the back of their hands. They trapped for a living, and they hunted for a living, and it was a tough way to eke out an existence.
But those were the people who discovered the gold?
You bet.
All right, we'll take a break here. Be back in a second to consider this Tatshenshini region, the northwestern corner of British Columbia. Can't get further away than here. We'll do that right after this break. Bill Barley, Mike Roberts. We're taking a trip up to the northwest corner of British Columbia. But the thing that strikes me is that this is awfully late, isn't it? 1927 is kind of late for a gold find in BC.
Yeah, major gold find, and this was a major gold find for placer gold. It was very late. Actually, there had been a major gold find about 5 years before. This is Cedar Creek in the Caribou. We touched on it in another program, and that was a massive find. And really, I think at this stage, after Cedar Creek, nobody expected to find any other magnificent deposits of placer gold. I mean, take a look at all the creeks and rivers in British Columbia. There'd probably be 100,000 or more. And out of every 1,000 creeks, you can assume easily that 999 have been well prospected by veteran prospectors. So the chances of discovering even today or at any time after the 1900s was almost infinitesimal.
But this was the creek.
This was the creek.
Okay, let's set the scene here. Who do we have looking in this area?
We don't know for sure, but we know it's a small band of Klukshu Indians. I assume it's 4 people.
Yeah.
I assume it's a man called Paddy Duncan, high intelligence, with his wife, who's about 15 years older than he is. And he married her because of the tribal associations. And then I think he was accompanied by 2 other individuals, a guy called Big Jim Fred and Casey Fred, 2 brothers, also Indians. And they leave Dalton Post, and they come down the old Dalton Trail, and they come up the Tatshenshini, and they come to the mouth of a small creek. I don't think they'd been there before. Now, they have all their, what I call, survival gear with them, all their camping gear. Yeah. They're making a living as they go along, Mike.
Lots of stuff. Now,
sure.
I mean, for example, these are snowshoes as would have been made by the people at the time. This is bear paw snowshoes.
Yeah.
And look at that. This is made with a bent sure. continuous piece of wood and rawhide. Is that rawhide there?
Yeah.
Okay, that's there. Now, these trade kettles were important, too. They would have a few of these along. Yep. This is made out of brass. This is, could use this as a bell.
This is Hudson's Bay, actually, Hudson's Bay trade kettle, and very, very difficult to find now. But this is commonplace. This was absolutely necessity.
Necessity of that camp.
Yeah.
They had with them traps. They were going to go trapping.
Small traps, big traps. This wolf trap says right on it, of course. And interestingly enough, Mike, I think, because of the name of this creek, that Mrs. Paddy Duncan brought along one other thing, which was not commonplace.
Yeah?
And that was a gold pan. And so she brought a gold pan along, maybe as an afterthought, maybe because she had a hunch, I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, what happens, very interesting, they go up this creek, and now they're turning north They'd come down south into British Columbia from the Yukon. Now they're going back. They're going northward, kind of a northwesterly direction. And they're going up this creek, which is quite steep, high mountains, and this is really precipitous territory, you know, glaciers and all the rest of it. Yep. But she, I'm quite sure, while they were out hunting and trapping, I think she decided to dip her pan in the creek. And she dipped her pan in the creek, woman of considerable intellect, came across some gold like this, which they would refer to as hayujikaman, which is much gold.
Now, this would amount to about a quarter pound of
gold. About a quarter
right
of a pound.
Here.
Yeah.
And this would be chicken feed compared to what she was finding.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. This is coarse gold. This is nuggety gold.
Yeah.
But some of the gold they found in that first trip, we're quite sure, were nuggets up to a quarter of a pound. Now, they found larger nuggets later on, but certainly on that trip, they found nuggets up to a quarter of a pound.
Now, this photograph here, this is Patty Duncan on the left and his wife on the right. And she,
right.
you're crediting her with finding this.
Yeah, this photograph was taken some years later, probably about 1934. And when I look at this photograph, Mike, I kind of feel sorry for her. She doesn't look happy here. And she does in some of the earlier photographs, but in this particular photograph, she looks quite disconsolate, rather sad. And I rather feel badly for her. She certainly was, in my estimation, the discoverer of the creek, because the Indians called it Squaw Creek. Now, today, that's a term that is not generally used. Then it was certainly acceptable. Amongst the Klukshu and the Taltons themselves, they referred to this, and this was certainly acceptable. And what happened is, they knew that they were somewhere in British Columbia or somewhere in the Yukon, they weren't sure. Mining laws differed. So in the Yukon, they had discovery claim, as they did in British Columbia, and that was a double claim. If it was a new creek, you were allowed a double claim. Then you could stake above and below it. So they staked in the Yukon method, and they staked a number of claims above it, which would be called, the first claim above it would be 1 above, second claim 2 above, third claim 3 above, and then 1, 2, 3 below. And then we don't know how long they stayed. We assume they stayed quite a bit of the summer, because late that summer, 2 Indians appeared in Atlin, and they appeared at the government house. And old Atlin, as you know, Mike, was really quite a gold town, and had been ever since 1898.
Well, that was the Gold Commissioner's office in Atlin, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was government building, the Gold Commissioner's office, still standing in Atlin, by the way. Beautiful building, been in there a number of times. And Atlin itself was on a bit of a downturn at this particular time. The great discoveries in Pine Creek and Spruce Creek and Ruby. And this is, well, the great discoveries there were 1898, 1899, just till after the turn of the century.
It had been a long time since these people had seen a little action.
A lot of action, especially gold, this course, from a creek they had never heard of. Well, you can't keep it quiet, Mike. It's absolutely impossible, and certainly in a gold town like Atlin. So although it's late in the summer, a small rush ensues. And they go back to the area, and they probably come up over the old Dalton Trail from Atlin. That's the easiest route. And they stream in there, and much to their amazement, absolute astonishment, the creek is legally staked. The Indians have it all, and did a very good job indeed.
Is this unusual? This seems to be a rarity, is it not? I mean, the Indians and the Chinese were usually the last people involved.
Yeah, it's not usual, although there were some fine Indian prospectors all through British Columbia, on the Fraser, in the interior, on the Similkameen, up in the north, up in the Dease country, all through there. And remember, these two, when they'd come into Atlin, were carrying almost a pound of gold, and it was coarse nuggety gold. And they said they'd got that in 2 days each. So it meant that each one of them was panning about a quarter of a pound a day each. Well, a quarter of a pound a day each is pretty good.
Pretty good.
Sure. So they come back in, and the whites are amazed because the creek is staked. It is controlled by the Indians.
So do the Indians let anybody on? Are the whites shut out on this one?
No, of course they don't let anybody on, Mike. They know the value of gold. Gold at that time was about $16 a crude ounce. Yeah. That's a lot of money in 1927.
Okay. But obviously, some people get involved in this, and we're going to tell a little more about some of the other individuals.
Really quite a fascinating story of this first decade and the major decade on Squaw Creek.
Okay, do that right after we take this break. Don't go away. It constantly fascinates him. This is the equivalent of how much work for the people on Squaw Creek?
Well, that's probably about 2 ounces there, maybe a little over. So that would be 1 day's work for one miner, which is pretty good wages. Now, remember, Mike, you're looking at 1927. So they would be taking back about $16 a crude ounce, so they're making $32 a day. That is a king's ransom. That is sudden wealth for generally for people who were not used to sudden wealth.
What were they making normally, or if they even thought in terms of money?
They didn't. They thought in terms of survival in this area, and you know, they'd catch the odd good pelt. They'd get good money for that at Dalton Post or perhaps the Hudson's Bay Company. But generally speaking, it was a question of survival. So now suddenly they get a windfall, and the windfall is easily traded. Everybody understands gold in the north, and it was an interesting creek, Mike, because it was what we call a poor man's creek. It was shallow, shallow bedrock. A lot of the gold, see, the gold filters down through the gravels, and if sometimes it filters down through the gravels in Spruce Creek, 175 feet. So the best ground is way down in bedrock at 175 feet, and you have to break up the crevices and cracks in bedrock and shove it through a sluice box. Not on Squaw Creek. On Squaw Creek, 2 feet to about 8 feet.
That's all the overburden they had to peel off in order to get down to pay dirt.
They were right into nuggets, Mike, that were that big, 1.5 pounds at 2 feet. And another interesting thing about the creek, the best section of the creek had heavy, heavy boulders on it. So this is typical. And contoured boulders, Mike, which means they were shaped. They weren't ordinary boulders.
So this photograph here shows that pretty well. There's the back of somebody obviously working in the creek, and that would strike me as being darn difficult to work in. All those boulders, you have to pitch each one of them aside.
Very. You can use a tripod in some of them if you want, you know, but it's and you can't pitch it underground you haven't done yet. You see, you have to put it behind you. So it means you're constantly working up, and you're usually working upstream, almost always. And the Indians at first, they were nugget hunters. There's not much doubt about it. They would go look around and see if they could pick up a half-pound nugget or a quarter-pound nugget or a pound or a pound-and-a-half nugget. But then they began to realize they had to do this systematically, and there were very quick studies indeed, Mike.
These people picked up the fine points of going after all of the gold and taking it out. Now, when you refer to the discovery claim, that is just... that means nothing more than this is where the gold was found first.
That's right.
Did it turn out to be the best ground?
It was either they were lucky or very skilled. It was by far the best ground. Discovery claim and one above discovery. The discovery claim was controlled by Paddy Duncan and his wife and the two Fred brothers, who also controlled the claim above. And when I go over the records of that, Mike, says, you know, the discovery claim produced 350 ounces this year and 400 ounces this year, approximately, usually. I think the Indians were a little cute. I think they weren't letting the whites know exactly how much they were making on that discovery claim, and I think they did beautifully. And so the best claims were from discovery claim and above. So the number 1 above was controlled by the Fred brothers, most definitely. Number 2 above was controlled by a guy called Drury Crow, which is kind of interesting, Jimmy Cudwatt, and a guy called Harry Joel. These are the 3 miners who controlled that.
That's 2 above.
Yeah, that's 2 above.
So they could see the real good ground just down the creek from them,
that's right.
But they're making it pretty well, too.
That's right. And 3 above, also controlled by Indians. So 1 above is controlled by Indians, 2 above, 3 above by the Kane brothers. So they're controlling that. And
were they Indian people?
Oh yes, they were Clutchu Indians as well. And 4 above was controlled by another Indian, a guy called Johnny Fraser, if I remember correctly. And 5 above was controlled by Indians. But when they got beyond that, Mike, the ground wasn't quite as good. So they picked and chose right up to about 30 above. And the best ground they kept for the Indians, and the other ground they turned over on layman's agreements to various whites who drifted in. And a layman's agreement, Mike, that if you made 4 ounces a day, the Indians might say, well, we want 2 ounces of that, or 1 ounce. Probably would be less than that. Usually 10% is what they called, but sometimes they'd take 20 if it was good ground. And they were allowed to cancel that agreement, which indeed they did on occasion. But there were some very interesting whites who came in. Now, some of the Indians took advantage of it quickly.
Yep.
The Kane brothers, they established a pack train into Haines, Alaska. And this pack train would go in and out, bringing in supplies. That's about under 130 miles. I'm guessing at it, but probably about 130 miles. Long, tough route over the mountain passes. And their opposition there was a guy called Muncaster. Now, this is a photograph that's very interesting, Mike, because here we have a photograph in front of a log cabin on the creek, and on the extreme left-hand side is Paddy Duncan.
Yep.
And next to him is his old wife, and she's
happy here. You were alluding to how sad she looked in the other, but she looks pretty happy.
Yeah,
here.
she does. She looks pretty happy. They probably made a good strike there, and she's quite happy about that. In the center of this photograph is a very fascinating woman, And her name is Mrs. Muncaster. Her husband, he has a pack train competing with the Kane brothers. Yeah. But interesting enough, she had been in the big rush into Nome at the turn of the century. Here it is. This picture was taken around 34. So this is a third of a century later. She is still following the gold rush and looks pretty good. It didn't hurt her at all. No. And next to her, immediately on her left-hand side, which would be our right, is a woman who's just married a doctor who has come in there, and he's Dr. Joseph Mandy is his name, and they just got married. He's a geologist for the British Columbia government, so he came in to look over this creek. This was in the I think the 1935 report, or probably taken around that time.
So really quite a group of characters here, and and no matter how far away, no matter how much wilderness there was, gold brought people of substance, and brought people of talent who were looking for greater things.
Yeah, there's not much doubt about it. You see, all the towns around, Skagway was in decline. That's on the far west. Yeah. Atland on the east was in decline. The old town of Discovery, well, that was just on Lake Surprise, or just barely out of Lake Surprise on Pine Creek. It's gone. Certainly, Dawson City by this time is virtually a has-been town, with some miners who were hanging on the outlying creeks. So that this was an area that was really quite fascinating, and it was a new discovery.
So how many people did it finally attract, do you figure? I mean, when we talk about a gold rush, I mean, Victoria was built on the gold rush of '58, but how big a gold rush was this? How long did it last?
Well, this gold rush lasted about 10 years. That's, you can say, from 1927 to 1937. And at first, the Indians controlled all the leases, right from beginning to end, except those were beyond. They weren't even considering some of those leases.
It was bad gravel
that had chicken feed gold. And so they didn't bother. But the 36 major leases were controlled by the Indians. And about probably two-thirds of those mined exclusively by the Klukshu tribe, exclusively. And the other third were given in a layman's agreement to various whites who came in, including, but that's interesting too, because Mrs. Muncaster was the mining recorder in the area. She was an American citizen, knew a lot about mining, and they said, well, who on this creek knows a lot about mining? So they came to an American citizen, Mrs. Muncaster, who was made the mining recorder, only woman mining recorder in British Columbia in 1935.
I'm glad we got her picture in there, too.
Yeah.
Now, with these people making wealth that they had never seen before, what happened to the wealth? What did they do with it? What transpired?
Well, they bought items like this, Mike.
Well, I mean, everything in its place. And I saw a Remington shotgun, which would be, I guess, the best you could buy.
Oh, sure.
This became part of the family wealth.
Would be carrying a shotgun. That's for game birds, most definitely. Would be carrying probably a .94 Winchester, which was the all-purpose gun of the West, not much doubt about it.
Sure.
They would invest in new graniteware, which we have right here, Mike.
Now, what is graniteware? It's not made out of granite.
No, but it looks like granite. If you look at it, it's gray on the outside.
This was some sort of special design. It took the place of that mottled, speckled blue and white thing. This was better. This is different.
Well, about the same, actually. It depends on whether you like blue and white. Sometimes the Indians like blue and white because they had a marvelous idea of color. So they'd buy this stuff, and they'd buy other things as well. Here's an example. They'd buy some of the skinning knives.
Yeah, but, this isn't burning up that gold particularly fast, I mean, we're talking here $35 a day when they had nothing before, and you could buy quite a few of these knives for that kind of money.
And you're not only talking $35 a day. You're talking on the discovery claim with 4 or 5 other Indians working for Paddy Duncan, probably discovery claim at number 1 above, up to 2,000 ounces every summer.
2,000 ounces every summer.
Now, when you put that in the right context...
We're talking, what, $16 to $20 an ounce
You're talking $16 an ounce until after 32, I guess it was. Then it became $35 an ounce. So that you're talking massive wealth for people who really have not experienced massive wealth.
But where did it go? I mean, it can't be in knives, and it can't be in graniteware. It has to be... somewhere. Did they build great houses? Did they move to Victoria? Did they go to San Francisco?
Now it's interesting because you'll find that in the original gold rushes, the men who did extremely well did build great houses, usually in areas where they didn't discover the gold. Victoria was a favorite, of course. Other parts of Vancouver Island, to a degree in Vancouver. The Klukshu Indians did not leave the territory. And I followed it back through the Minister of Mines reports, which run right from, well, significantly from 1874 right to 1936, covering all that area. I see no other reference to these individuals in any other area, whether they continued mining, whether they were not used to sudden wealth, and I think this is probably the answer, Mike. Very, very easy for people who are not used to sudden wealth, people who win a lottery. Invariably, it affects them. They're broke within a few years.
The money just flows away.
Sure it does.
Just zooms away.
Easy come, easy go.
That was 27, okay. Have we had any gold rushes since then, or was that sort of the last big one in British Columbia? Was that the last, you've used the word Virgin River.
Yeah.
Is that the last one?
Well, Mike, what I think is very important, if I were a young man again, and I were to prospect for placer prospecting, and I would be very careful of this, I would head for that northeastern or northwestern corner of British Columbia. And I would probably start in that Squaw Creek region, and I would work east from there, working in a long band all the way through that Atlan district. I, for instance, believe that there's still some discoveries to be made in the Atlan area, old channels in that area, most definitely, no doubt about that. And then you can drift down into that Dease country. That's the Dease Lake country, and McDame and Thibert and Defoe Creek and Boulder Creek and Wheaton Creek, and then go over the Nation River country. And it's, even if you don't discover any gold, Mike, it's
seen some great country.
Oh, yeah. It's almost unbelievable.
The thing that fascinates me always is that on this little section of creek, from the discovery claim to 30 above and a little bit below, that's the only place that the gold was on there.
Yeah.
Gold has to come from somewhere. It must be cut off and have its source somewhere else. So, it's got to still be up there.
Yeah.
The source has got to still be there.
It's quite possible. Now, remember that there are good hard rock or lode miners who've looked for the source.
Yeah.
We know that some of the gold originally had quartz seated in it, Mike, and that gold indicated it came from a quartz seam very close by. This gold came out of a quartz seam, and certainly it may be there, it may be washed out. It's a guessing game, always is.
All right. 1927 we're talking about. It's the Squaw Creek discovery just off the Tatshenshini in northwestern British Columbia. Fascinating discovery with some interesting characters, and I thank you very much for telling it to me today.
You're very
and
welcome.
The way the gold disappears, it's almost like a gas disappears into the air. Take our leave of you now. Join us next time for Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.